Hi, my name's Trevor Hartley from the London School of Business and Finance, and today we're going to be looking at organizational behavior, and specifically the topic of individual differences and learning. Learning styles. Do you get it? This is a phrase which I've heard used over and over when talking to executives in organizations, as they reflect on whether their organization is truly continuing to be relevant in a changing world. You see, learning in organizations is an absolute necessity in order for the organization to remain relevant in its market. Having said that, let's have a look at the outcomes which we're going to be looking to achieve today. Firstly, we want to understand the principles of adult learning. And secondly, as we head into the case study element, we're going to look to recognize the impact of managing individuals within an organization by using an understanding of the adult learning principles. So let's take a step back. You may be sitting there asking yourself the question, what is the relevance of learning in an organization? And in order to answer that question, I'd like to use a quote by the former CEO of General Electric, Jack Welch. He said, "An organization's ability to learn and to translate that learning into action rapidly is the ultimate competitive advantage." And I think this is incredibly true. When you look at organizations and how they've developed, we've moved firmly from the industrial age, when it was all about manpower and machine power, and we've moved firmly into a knowledge worker age, which is around how do you engage the individuals that are working for your organization? How do you get them not only to come to work and do what's required, how do you get them to come to work with their hands, their heads, and their hearts, bringing a full engagement to drive the organization forward? This gets us to the point of looking to really understand these individuals and understand how they learn, because this will directly impact on the learning culture of your organization. When considering learning styles, you need to take a step back and consider what are the different learning theories that have been uncovered. One of the first was the Kolbe learning theory, where they looked at 4 different learning styles and 4 different stages in a learning cycle and overlapped these into a matrix. A derivative of that was the Honey-Mumford learning model, which took the Kolbe as a basis but then developed a more simplistic approach to it. This is the model that we're going to be discussing in a bit more detail today. So, reflecting on the key question of, so what is a learning style? Really simply put, a learning style, and you'll see it on the screen next to me, is the preferred most effective way that an individual gathers, processes, remembers, and applies information. Now, the key thing over here is that for an individual to really learn, they need to go through what we call the 4 stages of a learning cycle. And if you look on the slide next to me, you'll see that in an adult learning cycle, there are 4 key stages. There's a stage where you plan, a stage where you experience, a stage where you reflect, and finally a stage where you conclude. Now, the key amidst all of this is that each of us has a preference on where we engage in the cycle. But in order for us to have a full learning experience, we have to go through the full cycle. For example, when I first got married to my beautiful wife, we decided to buy ourselves some bar stools. We went to a retail outlet, bought the stools, and they came in a box. We got home, and my immediate reaction, being so excited, was to rip the box open, pull out the legs of the chair, put the top of the chair on, and start screwing rigorously screws into as many holes as I could find. At the conclusion, I stood back and gazed upon my masterpiece, at which point my wife went to the packet, looked in the packet, and asked the dreaded question, "Why are there still screws in the packet?" At this, my response was, "Don't worry, love, they always give you extras." That didn't seem to convince my wife, and I had to go back into the packet and find the manual. I opened the manual, looked in the manual, and there was a staged approach. First step, second step, third step, etc. I had to go and reflect on what I'd done, unscrew certain screws where I'd got it wrong, do the screws, and get to the end product, which was the completed chair. Now, if you had to think about where my preference was in jumping in, you'd probably come to the conclusion that it was around experiencing. Now, different strokes for different folks. Some of you may have got to the house, have carefully cut open the packet, taken out the manual, and gone immediately to the stage of step A, step B, step C, step D. How do we practically get this done? That would have typically been the stage of planning. Others of you would have walked into the room, put the box in a corner, taken a step back and said, I wonder where I should unpack this. These are typically the people that like reflecting. You would have got a fourth type of individual. They would have taken scissors, they would have neatly cut open the packet, they would have taken the contents out, put the contents very orderly on a tabletop. They would have then taken the guide and started at the very first page. Wood from China, imported, fantastic. These are typically your people who love the detail. They love engrossing themselves in information, and they would typically have come in what we call the concluding stage, which I'll explain in a bit more detail. The important thing over here is there's no one right answer in terms of where you start, but it's critical that you go through the cycle. And if you look at each of the preferences on the slide next to me now, you will see that for the planning stage, we call this preferred learning style a pragmatist. For the experiencing stage, we have an activist. For the reflecting stage, a reflector. And finally, for the concluding stage, a theorist. Now, all this means is each one of us, based on our circumstances, based on how we grew up, based on our past learning references, have developed a preferred learning style. I am an auditor by trade. Originally, I saw the light and became a learning and development expert, but prior to that, I was an auditor. And generally in audit firms about 10 years ago, your typical type of individual would have been your reflector theorist. People who don't necessarily like engaging a lot, they aren't out there, wild ideas, they're more run-of-the-mill, like order, like structure, like understanding the detail, critically analyzing things. That was typically how the auditors looked. However, you must realize that in determining learning styles, it's also impacted by your environment. And with the new generation X's and millennials coming through, there is a strong tendency around continually asking what is the relevance.